to record. Just send a message to Phoebe or I, and we will edit you out or something. Are you recording? I see the little.
Yeah.
Okay, so next week, Isaac. If you don't know Isaac, he's a 6th-year PhD student. He's a pretty cool guy. You'll get to know him if you're taking 170 this quarter. He is hosting a graduate school workshop. He's all about grad school and trying to encourage undergraduates to apply. So he's basically going to have an entire workshop that'll lead you through the application process and how you can have a really strong application. This is going to be November 20th at 6 p.m., aka next Friday, so 1 week from now. And if you have any specific questions you want to ask him, even if you're shy, you can just reach out to Phoebe and I, and we'll make sure he addresses your questions, since he's kind of working closely with us. So if you have any input, any concerns, anything you want to know, just let us know and we will take it to him. Or if you just want to attend the workshop and ask yourself, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer that for you. So yeah, it's never too late to start thinking about grad school. It's also never too early to start thinking about grad school. If it's something you're interested in, even like the slightest bit, I encourage you to attend the workshop and see what you can learn. Because as someone who's kind of going through the application process right now, there's a little more to grad school than undergrad. So definitely attend. One more thing. So our next project right now is going to be the Healthy Campus Metrics Committee. Basically, the way this works is that Healthy Campus gathers a bunch of data from surveys they've distributed, and then they're just going to give it to us, and they kind of want students to go through and just answer it. So really what we want is just to build a team of as many people as possible. No experience is required to be on this team. If you worked on the last project, which was the COVID survey, it'll be very similar, but if you didn't, just know that there are people who have experience who are more than willing to help you through. So if you don't know anything about coding, you don't know anything about statistics, you can just treat it as an opportunity to learn. We'd be happy to have you on board. And yeah, just as a general rule of thumb, no experience will really ever be required for anything we do in this club. We're really about trying to teach and get people that experience that they need. So this is definitely a good opportunity to get involved in if you're looking for something to do, especially if you're looking for some type of research opportunity, because undergraduate research is pretty much dead right now because of the remote learning situation. So this is probably about as close as you're going to get. So definitely take up on the opportunity, and it should be a good time. The COVID survey, which was our last project, went really well, and the department was really happy with it. So we're hoping to turn out a similar result. And then I will pass it over to our new event coordinator, Lauren, and she will talk about the Among Us game night.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Ebeltoft. Like Christian said, I'm the new event coordinator. And just tonight we're going to have an Among Us game. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye open for that. It's going to be at 7 p.m. about. And we're just going to have fun and just play the game.
Yeah, so if you don't know how to play Among Us, don't worry. A lot of people don't really know how to play. And that's kind of the fun, is just learning the game. So definitely come through. We're all just going to be on Discord. So all you have to really do is just join the Discord, and you can text in the chat or join our general call. And we'll all be there. It starts roughly at 7, but it just kind of depends on when people show up. So I'll be there. Hope to see you all there too. And with that being said, we will pass it off to Phoebe. I will stop sharing my screen now, and she will get started with our coding workshop.
Hi everybody, my name is Phoebe, and just real quickly, I dropped in the chat the RMD file if you want to look at and just follow along, as well as a quick little data set that we made just as like an example. But if not, that's okay, you can just follow along on this screen, which I'll share right now.
A quick note, if for some reason you can't find those files and you need them, just feel free to message me and I will send them to you.
Yeah, so if you're a veteran and you've been coding in R for some time now, this workshop might be a little boring since we're just starting like from the beginning, but hopefully you'll still be able to learn something. In this workshop, we will go over just the basics of an R Markdown and then get into some R programming topics, such as going over variables, functions, vectors, data frames, and reading in data files. And if time permits, we will do some practice problems together. So what you're looking at right here is just RStudio. It's basically the environment that we work in to code in R. We also call it an IDE. And it's basically just to make coding in R a lot smoother and easier. So if you've coded in R before, or like in any programming language, you'll probably know what a console is, but anything that you type in here will be read in as code. So if you want to do like any sort of like evaluation, it's pretty just simple, just type it in here. However, the thing is you can't like go back and edit it. So just be mindful of that. Like I wouldn't write like scripts in here, obviously. Just anything that you want to evaluate real quick and not have to put it in the actual document. And then this little window up here is your RMD file. It's known as R Markdown. And we kind of put together like a little script just to go over the topics. But to create your own R Markdown, you can go to File, New File, and then just open your own. And I'll just show you what it looks like. This is kind of the default that RStudio kind of like writes for you. It's just like some documentation, but I usually just delete it and then go on with like my work. And then there's a lot of different capabilities, which you'll see later that is really nice about our markdowns. So everything that we write in this document will be read in as text unless it's written in this like grayish box. This is known as a code chunk. So anything that you type in here will be read in by the computer as code. And yeah, basically anything outside of that can just be like, yeah, other documentation that you like want to write or explain. So I find this really helpful, like when you're doing like homework and labs, because it just makes everything like aesthetically pleasing and easy for other people to read. So that's another thing. If you're like working with other people too, you want them to be able to understand what you're coding. I'm sorry, can you guys hear that in the background? Like on my end? Okay.
Oh, you're good.
My roommate's vacuuming and it's a little distracting, sorry. Yeah, so that's basically all for the code chunks. So I'll pass it on to Lauren Flemmer and she'll quickly just review variables as Christian and Jose went over last time.
Yeah, so sorry, I have background noise too. My dog's barking, so excuse that. And before I start, if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to ask in the chat. Neither Phoebe or I or even someone else can help you out. But for variables, a variable is basically kind of the base like element of writing code in R. And a variable is a way to store information. You can store whatever type of information you want. Phoebe just typed a variable called x and she assigned it the value of 1. So basically anytime you print out, I'm so sorry, anytime you print out x, it'll print out whatever value is assigned to it.
I mentioned if you want to run like all of the code in the chunk, you can press like this green button right here. There are some shortcuts if you're interested. You just press Control-Shift-Enter. If you just have your cursor in the chunk, and that'll run everything in there for you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different types of variables. You can do a word or a string, a number, basically anything you want. Right now, Phoebe's typing. Oh, we got a question. Phoebe, do you want to answer that one?
Sorry, what did you say?
Do you want to answer the questions in the chat? I feel like
Someone asked, what's the difference between a markdown and a script?
I guess a markdown like is a script. It's just like a different format. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I just consider them scripts as well, but like with scripts, like everything is read as code. Like you don't have the capability of like rendering it to like a nice looking document as you would a markdown. Yeah, I'm not able to see the chat, so.
Okay.
I will read any questions.
Okay.
And you can see the variable Phoebe just typed out y, and she set it equal to x is greater than 20. So when she prints that out,
so yeah, I'm gonna run this whole chunk, and I just want to bring your attention to this little upper right hand box. This is your environment. So any variables that you declare will be stored into memory, and you can see that like in this window here. So I declared 3 variables, X, Y, and Z. And it'll tell you like the name of the variable, the type, length, size, and its value, as you can see right here. And if we want to print it, we simply just type out like the variable and then run that part, and I'll show you its output.
do you want to run the y so we can see what?
Okay, yeah. Let's just at the bottom here. You run that entire chunk, it'll output all of the variable names.
Mm-hmm. So this shows 3 different types of variables or 3 different types of data. The first one is an integer. The second one is a Boolean, which is either true or false. And then the third one is a string, which is just any words you want inside of quotation marks. And next we're going to talk about functions and vectors. Functions you can think of just like in math. It'll do a certain task or do a certain procedure based on what input you put into it. So you could have a function that adds up different numbers. You could have a function that finds the mean. And there are even some pre-made functions that other R users make and put out for anyone to use that make things a lot easier. An example of this is the t-test function, which makes it a lot easier to perform a t-test in R, so you don't have to do it by hand. And one function that we're going to talk about today and focus on is the concatenate function, which is just C. So basically this function kind of groups together different variables of the same type. So you could type in a bunch of numbers separated by commas. And when you print that out, it'll combine them all together into one variable. And you can think of it as kind of like a list or a vector. Instead of just an individual number, it's that whole group of numbers as one element.
So I'm just showing you different ways to use the concatenate function. Basically, one thing, like the thing to remember is that you need to make sure that they're all the same data type. So in the first one, we have a vector of strings, vector of numbers. And the second one, we have a vector of strings. And when we print that out, it'll just output whatever we have in there, like together. One thing that I kind of discovered yesterday, actually, is that when you try to combine strings and numbers, like this, for example, and you run that, it'll just read the entire thing as a string. So if that's not your intention, you'll probably run into some problems later. So good practice is just to make sure that everything you kind of like combine together is of the same type. And that's not just for like numbers and strings, that's also for like data frames and lists, whole vectors. So, you know, good practice is just stay consistent.
Yeah, something else that's important to note is you can also set a vector equal to a variable. So she can set it equal to my vector, and printing that variable out, my vector will do the same thing as if you assigned it to a single number or a single string or a single value. It'll print it all out when you call that variable name.
Yeah, so if we wanted to now print this vector out, we wouldn't just type this, we could just type out that variable name and run that, and it'll output. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but if you want to run like a single line of code rather than the entire chunk, the shortcut would just be Control Enter. I believe on Mac it's Command Enter, but don't worry too much about that. If you can't remember, you can just press the green button.
Yeah, so now we're going to use another function called the sequence function. You could use this if you want to use a bunch of different numbers in a sequence, but you don't want to type them all individually. When we did 1 through 5, it wasn't too hard because there's only 5, but for example, if we wanted to do a sequence of numbers from 1 to 100, you can concatenate those. We can use this function, and you can see there's a vector of all numbers 0 to 100. And this is thought of, you can see this as another function because there's 2 inputs and the output is a vector.
This function sequence just produces like a sequence of numbers basically. But to make it a vector, you would put it into the concatenate function. It's kind of like this. So it's the same way we just individually typed out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in C right here. But instead of like doing all that like 100 times, we would put like a function inside of a function. And then when we do that, this is now technically a vector. They look the same. But if you wanted to like do some analysis with it, like get like the mean, I'll do my vector too. I'll store it into this variable, and now we can perform more functions on this variable that we just created. So let's say we want to find the mean of the numbers 0 to 100. We type in mean, my vector 2, and then when we run that, we get 50.
Does anyone have any questions at this point? You can say it out loud or type it in the chat. If not, we can move on. We already went over the mean function a little bit, but the function that Phoebe just used to find the mean of, oh, we got a question. What's the difference between a variable and a vector? So a variable is basically something that you can use to, I guess, like rename a different object or a different thing in R. So you would use a variable to, I guess, store the value of a vector, if that makes sense. So I'll elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, a vector is like a data structure. It's like a list of like those numbers, but a variable is just something that we store that information in so that we can manipulate later. Does that make sense? Okay, did you want to explain like other functions that we can use on like
Can I ask a question real quick?
yeah.
So for my vector 2 on line 73, you did the concatenate sequence 0 to 100. Could you also concatenate other numbers to that? So maybe if you wanted like to do 0 to 100 and then 150, could you do that?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure. you can. So yeah, the concatenate just takes in like, does it take in a list? It takes in like a list of values, whatever that may be, not limited to numbers.
Yeah, there's a lot of other functions. I guess another we can show is like min or max. We can call the min function on my vector 2, and it'll give us the smallest number in the vector, which is 0, and max will give us the largest number, and that's 150, the number we just added to it. Do you want to go over any other functions that might be important?
I mean, there's so many functions. I guess the main idea here is that R is like open source, right? So many people have like already done like the hard work for you to create these functions. So like Lauren was saying, like, you know how to do a t-test by hand, which is great. But if you just know like the t-test function in R, then you wouldn't really need to know how to do that. Especially when you're working with like big data too. It's really helpful to know like all sorts of different packages and functions to utilize to do what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you need to do something in R, there's probably a function that'll help you do that. So Googling is definitely a really great source.
Any descriptive statistics, like, they're usually, they have like simple names. So this would be like the standard deviation, for example. But the list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Phoebe's going to go over on how to maybe find more functions that might help you out, or kind of like getting help in general in R. And kind of seeing how to use these different functions better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me personally, I don't really like memorize too many functions. I mean, naturally, I'll just kind of like get used to it, but a lot of the times I just kind of have to look them up. And like a general like idea is that if you are stuck on something, it's probably a good idea for you to try to help yourself. So if you like don't know exactly like what a particular function like does, or the certain parameters that it takes in, you can type in like a little question mark, for example, and you don't know what like mean does, just for example. You would run this, and then it'll open up this R documentation like at the bottom right hand corner. So yeah, it'll give you like a description of what that function is, and then the arguments. The arguments are just like what you put in like those parentheses. That's your input, and then it'll give you an output.
So, and just to add on to that, Alyssa, so our documentation is pretty awesome, especially compared to a lot of other languages. But if for some reason it doesn't make sense, Google will be your best friend, because I promise you that probably somebody has had the same question you have before, and someone has probably answered it. So if you just Google R how to do this, you'll usually come across the function and someone explaining how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Google is great. Stack Overflow. Yeah, just additionally to the question mark, you can use the help function. It basically acts as the same thing. You would just put in the name inside that parenthesis, and then it'll pop up. Well, I guess that's not a very good example. Let's do standard deviation. And you run that line, the same R documentation will pop up in the little window right here. So not only is that helpful for like functions, but like certain packages, I believe. If you just like want to know like what it's about, you can like Google this too, and like our documentation like website will like give you the same information. But I think RStudio kind of has like a lot of helpful information to, guide you through. And another thing that I learned recently is that if you want to know like how to style your R Markdown, or just kind of know like the basics, you can use like the help at the bar up here. And then, you know, I mean, there's like a bunch of options, but I learned this. This is the Markdown quick reference. And so this is just like different lines to help style your R Markdown. Maybe I'll show you as an example later, but this is more for like aesthetic purposes. It's pretty cool. Okay, I know we're kind of like on a time crunch, so yeah, if you have any more questions, just type it in the chat and then Christian can answer it. But I'm gonna move on to data frames. So data frames, I just like to think of it as like a, you know, just a data table. In the real world, data isn't just like a bunch of numbers combined together. There needs to be like some sort of meaning attached to it. So we're gonna just make one like as an example. So a person can have like a name, an age, height, ethnicity, etc. So we're going to create 3 vectors and then combine them together to make our data frame. So I'm going to create a variable called name, and then I'm going to use the concatenate function to create some names. So I have Abby, Bill, and then Carl, for example. I'll run that. And if you remember, like up here in our environment, we have our name vector. And just to mention that when you create your data frame, all of the vectors have to be of the same length. So we have 3 data values like in this vector. So in the age, we should do the same. To 11, 20, and I don't know, 2. You can run that. So real quick, I'm just going to create another one for the sake of an example. This is Isabel. I'm going to make it a Boolean. So this will be false, true, and false because of their ages. So when we run all that, we have 3 vectors now. But how do we combine them? So we're going to introduce a new function. It's called data.frame. And we're basically just going to list out like the vectors that we just made. So name, age, and is adult. And when we run that, you see here very nicely, R puts together those 3 vectors. It's really important to know that they all have to be the same length, like each of the vectors, or else it'll pop out an error. If you notice that all the vectors are of the same data type as well. And I guess good practice is to just declare it into a variable. So we'll do that. And if we want to print it out, we'll print out that variable name. This is helpful. So if you want to like manipulate some of the columns, sorry, not manipulate, choose like certain columns of like the data frame, you're going to be able to do that. So just as an example, if you want to like specify a certain vector, we would type out the data frame name, variable. The $sign, this is to denote that we're going to select like one of these columns. And we'll do age, for example. So when we type that out, it'll give us the vector. And then from there, we can do like our regular descriptive statistics if you want. Summary function just kind of gives you like the 5-number summary of, or I guess 6, of the column right here. So, oh, it doesn't give you the mean, sorry. So let's say we wanted to find the mean of like those 3 people's ages. Oh, it's just 11. Yeah, so this is just a very small example that we made, but most of the time, like in your classes and, you know, in the real world, you'll be given like much bigger data sets to work with. So definitely helpful to know like this notation right here, because you're going to be given a data set. And if you want to specify like certain columns, use the $sign and then type out the column name. And running out of time, so we're just going to be going into reading data files. So like I said, most of the time you're going to be given like big data to work with. You're not going to be like making your own. So what we're going to do here, we're going to use the read CSV function. And this is all dependent on what type of file you're given. What I put in the chat is just a CSV. So if you have that, you can follow along. Just make sure you know like where it is on your computer, because what we're going to put into these parentheses is our file name. So file here, this is our argument. So remember how I said like this equal sign is just kind of reserved for like function names. We wouldn't put like an arrow here, which is why we usually just kind of reserve like that arrow for like variable declaration. But yeah, so here is our file parameter, and then I have my path on the side. So if you go to the document on your computer, just copy the path onto there and then remember to put it in quotations in your function. And remember to change this little backslash. So like when you copy and paste your file name into R, it'll, you know, just give you like a single slash, but for some reason R kind of freaks out when you try to like read that in. So you have two options. You can either just add another backslash, or you can change it to like a /. So if I don't want to do this, I could also just change it to that. And it's just preference. Either one will work, but just remember not to have like a single backslash like this. And this is what the data looks like. It's also very small. Let me just kind of put together real quick. But I'll pause right here and just like wait for everyone and see if they're having any problems. Alan says that the backslash probably has to do with it being reserved for specific things already. Probably. There's like a reason for everything, but just remember that, because if you're getting an error, that's probably it, or like your path is wrong, something like that. For those who are following along, are you able to read in the data file that I uploaded? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna read this into a variable because it's good practice. And also now I'm able to specify what column like I want to work with. So again, this is the data frame variable name. We're going to use the $sign, and then let's say age. I'm going to print that out. It gives us a vector of ages. Another thing, if you don't want to like type this all out, because you know if you're coding a lot, maybe you know you want to reduce the amount like of lines or just the amount of text that you write, you can attach your data frame. And what this does is it kind of like, how do I explain this? It like separates like the variable names in that data frame from like actual data frame. So yeah, I'll just show you. Like if I type out age, then it'll, give me the vector. If I type out name, it'll give me like all of the names of that data frame. So if you don't want to like type out this every single time, you can just pop it into the attach function, and then from there you'll be able to use them separately. That's all we're going to go over for this workshop, but we have a little bit of time now to do some practice problems. So go ahead and give it a shot yourself. If you have any questions now, we can take the time to answer them. Sorry if we went like a little fast or didn't explain some things super in depth, but we'll try to cover everything so that everyone's on the same page now. But go ahead and just read it and try to do it yourself, and we'll go over the answers soon.
And while that's happening, I'm gonna once again plug the Discord. So if you are new to HISS and want to keep up, definitely join our Discord. That's where everything goes down.
I'm going to stop my share because I'll start typing out the answer.
Oh, one more thing to mention. So we have a GitHub. If you've never used GitHub before, basically what it is just a place where you can put your code online. So we will post all the answers online on our GitHub. So if you want to take a look there, if you ever forget something or maybe you had a hard time following along, everything will be up there and you'll be able to keep up to date.
Alyssa asked a very good question that I forgot to mention, but the hashtag in the code chunk means comment. So commenting is very good, just coding practice again, because if you're working with other people and you just want to be super clear of like what exactly you're trying to do, you can just write like a little comment in the code chunk to explain like what it does, what it means. And I'll share my screen again in a second to go over the answers.
Also, thank you to Alan for continually answering questions. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's difficult to like look at your share screen because for some reason I think it like Zoom kind of just exits out like every single time I like try to look at the chat, and then I have to keep going back. Did anyone have a chance to like do all three of them? Maybe some veterans want to share. I guess since we're running out of time, I'll just do it real quick. Does GitHub make sharing code easier for projects? Yeah.
So to answer your question, in the software engineering world, it's kind of an essential. But as data scientists, at this level,
Not so much.
not as much.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen again. Second. Okay, so the first question asks you to create a new column for the My Data that describes the person's gender. So My Data is just what we created up here. I'll print it out again. Oh shoot, I already ran it. Anyways, just ignored like this gender column. Before we were just given this, right? And so to create a new one, we would just kind of do, just like imagine that we're like calling a non-existing like column, for example. And this is kind of how we like create a new one. So again, the data frame, the $sign, and then like the variable name. And then from there, we can manually type in the data here. And so I already ran it, but when you run that, you should get a brand new column. Okay. What does this one ask you? It asks you to add a new row. Okay, so this one you're going to need to use a new function called rbind. So basically what you're going to do is create like a whole separate data frame using like this data frame function. And so this one was a little tricky and we didn't like go over it too much in detail, but anyways, the data frame that like the information that we have here, we have the name, age, favorite color, and then gender. So everything that already existing in the data frame that we have. You have to make sure that you have every single object so that everything is even, and R knows what you're doing. So I'm gonna run that data frame and then put it into the variable MyData2. And then what rbind does is that it takes the rows and binds them together. So the R stands for rows, and then there's also a function called cbind where it combines like the columns together. But anyways, you would just list out the two data frames in your rbind function like this. Yeah, I'll type it out down here so we can see what it looks like. So your rbind parentheses, and then list out your two data frames. So we have one called my data, and then we just made my data 2. So as you can see, we have a new row for Nick and his information. And all I did was kind of override it into like our existing data frame. So rather than creating like a new variable for it, we just overrided the information and stored it in our previous data frame, my data. And so when we print that out, we have our complete data frame. Okay, and then lastly, this one asks you to write a column that details the person's age. 1 second, Eric asks, so you can't access my data 2 anymore? You can. So if it's in memory here, if you like didn't override it with anything, you can. So got my data 2. And that just gives you the data frame with only Nick's information. Okay. Okay, so third column, you have to detail the person's age, whether they're an adult or not. Okay, so this one could be a little tricky. I should have just typed it out from the beginning. I just copy pasted it. But like Lauren had mentioned, if you write like an expression, that will read in as a Boolean. So if the person's age is over 18, then that will be considered true. Let me just up it out here so we can take a look at it. Okay, so if Billy's age is read in, he's 36, that's greater than 18, that will be read in as true. But for Abby, she's 12, that's not greater than 18, so that'll be read in as false. So I'll just show you what it looks like if I run this. Run this line of code. It'll give me a vector of trues and false, Boolean. And if you want to think of it this way, like the plus, minus, like all the operations are considered functions as well. So you can utilize that. Okay, yeah, so I ran this here, but I stored it into a column called isAdult into the MyData data frame. So I'm going to run that. And then when you run, or when you print the whole data frame again, you have a new column, isAdult. And that matches up with their information. So you could.
I think you cut out a little bit there.
Huh? I cut out?
Age, and you're going to compare it to age list. It's going to go through all the people and say whether they're older or younger than 18, and you can make a new column with that list. And then I have a question in chat. Let me answer it. Oh, Phoebe's back. Welcome back.
Okay, my internet doesn't.
Or is she still frozen? I can't.
Hello?
We can hear you.
I'm going to turn off my camera. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Anyways, as I was saying, you could go in and manually create a Boolean vector and just type like false, true, true, false, true, true. But when you're working with large data, that's just going to be way too time consuming, and no one wants to do that. So utilize operations and functions so that it can automatically do that for you, which is basically what this example is trying to demonstrate. Sorry, guys, I don't know if you caught all of that, but I kind of heard Christian explaining it somewhat. Okay, I realize that it is close to 4 now, so if you have a 4 p.m. class, feel free to go, and we'll have like the full script on our GitHub if you want to just take a look at it and do some more practice or just play around with it. But yeah, this is the end of our meeting/workshop. Thank you so much for coming. We'll stick around. I'll end the recording.